Hi, everybody, and welcome to our last creative writing webinar of this entire spring. I've been having a lot of fun. I hope you guys have been having fun too. It's pretty exciting, but also a little bit sad that today is our last creative writing webinar. So I thought it'd be fitting to talk about, of all things, the end. How do we end a story or a book? How do we bring it all to a close? Well, it seemed fitting. So let's see, before we jump in here, who is attending today for the last one. Looks like we have a lot of our faithful viewers. People have been here for a lot of the other creative writing webinars. We have AG, Anya, Angelica, April, Aubrey, Kanan, Cosimo, Ethan, Evelyn, Evan, Fallon, Haley, Isis, Gianna, Katja, Lila, Lorna, Milo, Nim, and Nish, Ron Beer, Shanna, and Simon. Hi, everybody, and hi, everyone that's still coming in. I'm just really happy you guys are here today. These have been really fun. I hope you guys have been learning a lot, and I gotta tell you, I feel like I have been refreshing and learning more just teaching you guys. I've always thought if you want to get really good at doing something, trying to teach it to others is one of the best ways, because you have to get more practice doing it yourself. You have to get more certain of what you're talking about yourself. So not only would I be really, really happy if you guys continue to practice everything we've been learning here, but I hope that you pass some of this information on. If you have friends or siblings or other family members that are interested in writing, please continue to pass on the knowledge of anything that you have felt was successful for you, or anything that you felt you learned. Feel free to tell others about it too. All right. So also, as always, if you want to answer one of the questions that we ask for an activity, or you have any questions, you can put those in the Q&A box so that we can see them and answer them. And hi to everybody that's saying hi in the Q&A box. All right, here we go. So the end. Those are the words that we always like to see at the end of a story when it's been a good one. We even like to see those words when it's been not such a good story, because then it's over. But the end, very important. It's kind of like when you see one of those big, if you've ever seen like an Olympic gymnastics routine, and the person's like doing all these crazy flips and amazing things. At the end of their routine, what do they always have to do? They've got to like be able to jump off the bars or off the beam or whatever. They've been doing this incredible balancing act, and they call it sticking the landing. They got to land on the mat at the end and hopefully go ta-da. They put their hands up, and if they just flopped on their face at the end, you'd go ooh, and it would kind of make the whole thing not as good. So in writing, just like in gymnastics or a lot of other things, you have to stick the landing. You have to finish it off solid. It leaves the reader feeling good about the story. If you've ever read a story that has a bad ending, it can kind of make the whole story kind of suddenly not as good. I just finished reading a book a few weeks ago. I think I mentioned it in another webinar. The whole book was like, I was like, all right, this is okay. This is okay. The ending, terrible. It made me think back over everything I'd read, and I liked everything in the book less when I got to that ending. If the ending had been different, I think the whole story might have been better. So, very important. All right, here we go. So you've been writing a story or a book. You introduced great characters and had them go on an amazing adventure full of awesome descriptions and crazy twists. They saved the princess, defeated the aliens, and learned something along the way. How do you end your story? We're going to talk about just 3 ideas for that today, but 3 things that you can keep in mind when ending a story or a book. First off, over a month ago, we were talking about the hero's journey. This is a lot of stories kind of go in a circle. Where the story starts is called the introduction to the protagonist's world. Protagonist means main character. You start the story off by kind of telling the reader about the normal world, the way the world is. And then the character goes through all these things. They learn a lot. They have challenges, they overcome them, they beat the final villain. But at the end, they often return home. So we start up here in Act 1, but by the end, after we've gone in this big circle, usually the character has to kind of return home. They have to go back to some form of normal. An example of that from a pretty well-known story is Harry Potter. At the beginning of the story, you have to give your character some problems. Harry Potter has a lot of problems at the beginning of the first book, the first Harry Potter story. He's literally living in a closet under a staircase. He feels very sad, very alone. He doesn't really have a strong supportive family structure. Anything else going on in the story, this is really the heart of it, is that he's not very happy because he's pretty alone and doesn't really have anybody around him that like really loves him. So through the course of the story, the character learns to overcome his problems, Harry in particular, but in your story, this should be the case too. You should start off with some problems that your character kind of learns how to get stronger and how to fix things and overcome things, so that at the end of the story, you show that your character has grown and fixed some of their problems. You don't have to fix every problem, but as long as your character has kind of advanced or grown or improved at some of the problems that were facing them, it will feel satisfying to the reader. By the end of the first Harry Potter story, sure, he's, he has learned some magic. He defeated the Dark Lord a first time. He's had some pretty awesome adventures, but possibly more than anything is that Harry has kind of gained some strong friendships. He's kind of gained a family of people that care about him, and he's kind of overcome, he's made some big progress towards fixing the biggest problem in his life, which is feeling alone and not feeling like he has people around him that care about him. So stories can kind of have, they're different from real life in the sense that in real life, your real life is just sort of a series of things that are happening. Our lives, they have important, fun things that happen. They have serious things that happen. They have a lot of not so serious things that happen, not big deal stuff that happens, sort of like our daily lives. The things that if you wrote the story of your own life, there's a lot of normal everyday stuff that you just kind of leave out. Stories are different in that you get to control the whole beginning, middle, and end. So since you are in control and since you're the person picking what's going to get written down, you can start thinking about, as you start a story, all the things that you start out, how will those things end up? You should put things in the beginning of your story that can be fixed or completed or wrapped up or handled by the end of the story. In a way, stories can feel more satisfying than sometimes real life things, because you can put that sense of beginning, progress, and closure there. You can open up a can of worms at the beginning of the story, and at the end of the story, firmly close it and take care of it. So a story that you're just kind of writing along and things that are just kind of happening, it might not be satisfying to the reader, because it might feel a little bit too much like real life where things just kind of happen. Readers really like the sense of a story having real purpose and having a real feeling of going somewhere. There's a real sense of growth and accomplishment, and then finally completion, that things have been fixed or improved. So for our first activity today, describe a problem your character could have at the beginning of a story. Then describe how they could fix that problem by the end of the story. So for all three of our activities today, you can think about one overall story. You can just make it up right now. I think it's often fun to make it up right now, not to think of something you've already written in the past. Because if you think it up right now, you can really make sure you're able to apply these activities to it. So start thinking of a story and describe a problem that a character could have at the beginning. Then describe how they could fix that problem by the end of the story, and put your answers in the Q&A box. While you guys do that, I'll just see if you guys had any questions in here. Thank you, April. I'm glad you liked the speech at the beginning. Katya says, an end usually has a happy ending, such as if you have a mystery, then solve the mystery. Yeah, a lot of books do. It's kind of fun for a story, whatever the mystery is or whatever's happening during the story. It feels good for there to be a happy ending, for there to be a conclusion or wrapping up of what happened during the story. Not every single story has a happy ending. Some end on kind of a sad note, but most of the stories we like the most do have some form of a happy ending. Thank you, Evelyn. I'm very happy to be your teacher. Kanan says, something I don't like about some books is that they leave questions without answers. Kanan, we're going to come back to that a little bit later, but thank you for bringing that up. Remind me if I forget, but we're going to talk about books that leave you with questions without answers. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. Yes, Fallon, it really was a month ago. It feels like a long time ago, but not that long ago at the same time. Yeah, we talked about the hero's journey a little while back. That's a fun topic. You can read up more about that. There's a lot of books and websites that talk about that. Let's see. Okay, so here are some ideas coming in. Evelyn says, my person loves music, but they can't play an instrument. That's a good problem to have at the beginning of a story. So how could your character fix that by the end of the story? I'm guessing, Evelyn, that the character should learn to play an instrument by the end of the story. Then that will feel satisfying to the reader. Katya says, the character has never seen the ocean, and at the end, he gets to swim in it. Oh my gosh, that would be so satisfying to me. I love the ocean. So reading about a person that's never seen it, and then by the end of the story, they dive into the ocean, they swim around. I would be like, yes, reading that story. That'd be so great. Let's see. Fallon asks, what if you fix that problem sooner than the ending? Or at the beginning, then there's a new problem that gets solved at the end. Yeah, you can definitely have more than one problem. I read a book about storytelling once that suggested that stories, you could have your character have up to 5 problems. They, for some reason, liked that idea of 5 problems that your character fixes by the end of the movie. I don't know if you really want to have that many. Maybe if you are really sure about what you're doing. That sounds like a lot of problems to fix, because a person with 5 major problems, I think, would feel pretty miserable at the beginning of a story. That might be so miserable. I don't know if I'd want to keep on reading. But yes, it's totally okay to have more than one big problem that your character fixes. Or they could have one problem, solve it, then have another problem, solve it. But I think overall, it would feel good to the reader to have one biggest problem that the character gets at the beginning, and then they solve it right at the end, or they fix it or complete it. That gives your overall story one big issue that they're trying to fix by the end of the book. If you give them a problem and then they fix it, and then they get a new problem and then they fix it, your story might feel almost like a set of short stories. And that might be fine too. That'd be really interesting, and that's the direction you could go. But if you want the whole thing to feel like one big story or book, you probably want to introduce a problem at the beginning that doesn't really get solved till the end. Aubrey says, Roger is stuck in quicksand, but he hops out. That sounds like a short story, but that would be a lot of fun to read about. If that was a whole book, that would be very interesting, how we could tell a whole book about being stuck in quicksand. Isa says, the character desperately wants someone to care about them. They find a way to, it sounds like by the end of the story, they don't care so much about what other people think about them. Yeah, that could be a major character development for the person that they fix that by the end of the story. That's a good idea. AG says, John couldn't write. He didn't know what to write. He tossed away his ideas, thinking they were bad. He got bad grades, took hours on his essays, and he got really frustrated Until he met a teacher his mom got for him. His name was Corey. Oh, thanks, AG. From then on, John didn't have a problem with writing again. Thanks, man. Let's see. Katya brings up Rogue One, one of the Star Wars movies that has an awesome but also sad ending. Yeah, it's a good point. Without spoiling the ending for anybody that hasn't seen it, the characters have a major problem introduced at the beginning of the story, and it is resolved at the end. It's kind of sad, but it's also kind of very happy and very awesome because they do fix the problem, even though things don't turn out well for all the characters. Lila says, my character's problem is being afraid of her powers. By the end, she has learned to use them. Classic. Yeah, that's a great idea, Lila. That's a lot of superhero stories kind of start with that. A character like Spider-Man or other people, they start out, they don't really know what to do with their powers. By the end, they're confident. They're like ready to like be a superhero and take on the world. That's a great idea. Evelyn says, my person loves music, but she can't play an instrument. She discovered that she can dance and sing, and that has music. That's awesome. Shanna says, Sasha is stuck in her house, and by the end of the book, she gets out. That's the story of our lives right now. You're telling the story that we are all experiencing in real time. Very good. I can only read a couple more, and then we're going to go on to the next part. Milo says the character could be a magician, and they could have stage fright, but he went on stage enough times where the audience really liked his act that he does not have stage fright anymore. That is awesome. All right, great. So moving on, let's go to the next part here. All right, so many stories move in circles. And since they move in circles, it can be fun for the reader to have similar things happen at the end of a story as happened at the beginning. This is called having the ending of the story mirror the beginning. And here's an example of that. In The Lion King, the story begins with Mufasa, and Simba's mom. Simba's presented to all the creatures at over at Pride Rock. All the other animals from the savannah have come to see Simba presented to them. And there's a big music number. It's the circle of life. It's really, great music. And this is how we start the story. Well, how do we end the story? We're back on Pride Rock. Now Simba and Nala are the lions there, although they have their friends with them now. The end of the story, very similar to the beginning. It's the circle of life. Kind of like the hero's journey, how that was shown with a circle too. You often end the story in a similar fashion to you begun it. Because again, it's kind of like when you introduce problems at the beginning of the story and you have the character fix them at the end, you might have the character end up in a similar place as the beginning, but kind of on a new level. Let's say the person is kind of begins the story, they're like bullied in school, and at the end of the story, maybe you kind of end it off where they began. They're in the hallway again, but now they're confident and they're kind of in charge and they take care of the bully and handle it, so it's not a problem anymore. You don't want the ending of your story to be exactly the same as the beginning. Like you don't want the character to be kind of right back where they started in terms of they haven't learned anything, they haven't changed, things are exactly the same, because that can be really unsatisfying for the reader. It's like, wait, I read that whole story and things are just the same at the end as they are at the beginning. But if you put them in a certain spot or location, and then at the end of the story, maybe they're kind of in a similar location, but they're on a new level. They've learned, they've grown, and now they're sort of, whereas before maybe they were kind of, they were the effect of things at the beginning, maybe at the end, now they are like, they're causing things to happen, but in a similar environment. And they call that mirroring, because it's kind of, you're looking at like a mirror image. The beginning is very similar to the end, but better and changed and different at the same time. So I want you for the second activity to think of, and it can be for the same story that we just started describing. Think of a story beginning that could have a mirror ending. How could the end of the story be similar to the beginning? So just to throw some other random ideas out there. Yeah, like if you're telling a superhero story, maybe the character is, riding their bike through the city at the beginning of the story. And then at the end, after they've got their superpowers, they're flying through the same streets. And it's really exciting to see them, flying between buildings where they were riding their bike at the beginning. Maybe at the start of your story, a person's eating some really gross food in a restaurant. And through the whole course of the story, they learn to be an amazing chef. And at the end of the story, they are cooking amazing food that people think is delicious. So it can be really fun for your reader and really satisfying to kind of see how far the character has come, to see where are things at the beginning and where are they at the end. And you kind of give them something that you can compare. It's kind of a mirror image of the beginning that looks pretty similar in a lot of ways, but also pretty different because things have changed. All right, I'm gonna look at the Q&A box and see what you guys are coming up with. Let's see. Lorna says, my character has a problem, an isolation problem. She is isolated in the middle of a forest and has no friends. She only gets out of the forest when she goes to the fair with her dad. At the end of the story, she stays in town every summer with her new friends. All right, very cool. That sounds fun. April says, it could also be a cool story if they don't get their problem solved at the end. Yeah, I guess so. The only thing about that is, if the character doesn't solve their problems at the end, you can just kind of leave your readers feeling a little bit unhappy. It can just be, if you begin with them having problems and they still have the same problems at the end, it just feels a little bit of like, oh, what did I just spend all that time reading that story for? But if you do it in the right way, I mean, these are all just suggestions. If you do it in the right way and it's still a really fun story, it could work just fine. Lorna says their story begins in town and it ends in town. All right, awesome. Shanna says that Sasha was by the TV, I guess at the beginning of the story, so we could end it, that they watch a movie together. All right, awesome. Let's see, Katja says, the guy starts at home quarantined and ends the story at home drying off. All right, awesome. Isa says that in her story in the beginning, the character is robbing a bank. And at the end, they're the one catching the robber. Oh, that's a great example. It kind of reminds me of Zootopia. One of the characters begins the story as a sort of a con man, somebody that tricks people and breaks the law. And the character ends the story being a good guy. He's actually now part of the police force. So yeah, it's kind of similar in that there's sort of, the beginning and the end, the character has sort of like law and order, kind of crime stuff going on. But the funny mirror image is that he's the criminal at the beginning and he is the cop at the end. So yeah, great example. Let's see. AG says, beginning of the story, John sat at the table thinking desperately for an idea, but none came to him. After the story, John was sitting at the table again, but this time his pen is zipping across the paper. Oh, that's a great idea. Good job, AG. Yeah, having, see these first two activities, we can kind of combine these two ideas together. You can have the person solve their problems and kind of put them in a sort of a similar situation at the same time, because that can really show the reader kind of how far they've come. Towards the beginning of Harry Potter, the first one, he leaves on the train to go to Hogwarts, and the book ends with him getting back on the train to go home. So yeah. Milo says the magician goes on the same stage as he was on when he had stage fright, but this time he was confident. Great idea, Milo. Lila says, at the beginning of the story, my character is walking in the hallway alone when people start to bully her. At the end, she is walking through the same hallway with her new friends, and the bullies stay away from her. Very nice, Lila. That's a good mirror ending there. April says, adding to what she said earlier, no. In the second book, they get their problem solved. We'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. That's the third thing we're going to talk about. Yeah, Fallon points out that in one of the Avengers movies does end with a big problem getting worse, and they go back to solve this problem in the next movie. Yeah, that's a good point. I think the big difference between the Avengers movies, though, and when we would write a story or a book is that the Avengers movies did not try pulling that trick until way far along in their series of movies. I think the people that made the Avengers movies knew that we were so on board. They knew that we all loved those movies so much that they were kind of wrapping up a whole big long series of movies before they ended with like a, oh no, like really bad, sad ending in a way. You know, they knew that we were all on board, that we would wait and see the next movie to like find out what happened. I think if the first movie in your series of movies started out with a big sad ending, you might lose a lot of your viewers, or if it was a book, your readers. They might not want to go on and find out what happens if you end off the story with a big problem and nothing has been fixed and everything's bad. But if it's your 10th or your 20th story, you probably have a lot of readers or viewers that are like ready. They're like, oh, we're with you. We're going to wait and find out what happens and how this gets fixed. But that's a really good point, Fallon. Nim and Nish say, the character turns into a cockroach and learns everything he wants to know. Then he has to turn back into a human. Then he turns back into a human boy at the spot where he first turned into a cockroach. That's a great idea. Awesome. So Evelyn says, the character starts out dancing in her bedroom, practicing for her audition, but she didn't expect to get in. In the last part of the book, she dances gracefully across the stage to cheers. That's a great mirror image. Angelica says, my character watches sports shows and always wishes that she could do all that, but she can't. At the end, she is one of the most famous athletes in the world. That is a great idea. Awesome. All right. Fallon says, a young boy looks out his window sighing. He is the rain dancer of his village and is an important figure in the hierarchy of the village. However, even though he has a high position, he isn't trusted with anything and is instead locked up in his sanctuary where he is safe. He yearns for freedom and knowledge of the outside world. The story could end with him having a say in opening his sanctuary gates to the village. He is with others now and has friends. He has also solved other problems as well. Maybe it could end with him leaving to go help other people. That's a great idea. It feels very satisfying when you can bring the ending kind of back around to the beginning that way. Good job, Fallon. All right, great. So the last part that I want to talk about here is that the end of a story should wrap things up, but it can also suggest something more. At the end of at the beginning of the first Avengers movie, we see that Tony Stark, Iron Man, has built Stark Tower. He's built this tower. He put his name on it. It's this big, beautiful building. And a lot of the most important action scenes of the movie, at least towards the end of the movie, take place here. There's been a big battle. The end of the movie ends with the whole sign has been destroyed except for the letter A. And it's a very interesting looking letter A. And, the team has called themselves the Avengers. Well, if you're like watching closely here and you're thinking about that, it's like, the team is called the Avengers. And one of the very last shots of the movie is this big A on the side of the building. It ends the story, but it also suggests something more. It tells the audience, like, you know, you finished that story and you had a lot of fun, but wait and see what happens next. The Avengers movies also did something really smart, is they always put little extra scenes in the credits of their movies. It kind of gives you a little extra something. It gives you a little bit extra more. It kind of makes you go, oh, I want to see the next story. I want to see the next thing. Because sure enough, the next time we see Stark Tower, it has been rebuilt. And now that A shape has been made into the new Avengers symbol. And that tower is now Avengers Tower. So in the same way, many stories that are part of a series will end with some amount of a cliffhanger. It's important that you still finish things enough that the reader feels satisfied, but you can also suggest that there will be more story to read. So this is kind of what we were starting to talk about earlier a couple times with some of the stuff that you guys brought up, is you have to finish your story enough that the reader feels good, that they feel like you have finished the story. The problems that you gave the character, you should fix most of them, or at least make major progress on them by the end of the story. The villains that you introduce should be mostly beaten, or at least mostly handled. You know, the good guy can defeat the villain, and the villain escapes and says, "I'll get you next time." Because then you're kind of wrapping up the story. You're ending it, but you're also suggesting something more. You're telling the reader there will be more stories. Comic books have always been really good at this, because they are long stories that you can continue going back to and reading time and time again. Each section of an overall comic book story will give you an ending, but there's always little teases and hints that, like, there's going to be more story. Maybe one of the henchmen, you know, one of the sidekicks of the bad guy gets away and he's going to get revenge for the bad guy. Or maybe you have the main character at the end of your story retires and they're all done, but they pass on their knowledge or their skills or their equipment to their sidekick, and their sidekick is like, I'm going to go be the next hero. It's just really fun for the reader to be able to imagine that even though you have ended the story, that the story will keep on going. If you never write another story, the reader can kind of imagine where the story goes in their mind. But you also give yourself the opportunity, if you really enjoyed your own story, that you can write more that take place after your story is over. So you shouldn't leave too much unfixed, unfinished, or unresolved at the end of the story, because that can it can really make your reader angry. If everything is a loose end, if everything is a cliffhanger, then your reader can feel a little bit like, why did I buy this book? Or why did I read this story? Or why did I check this out from the library? This is really just the first part of a story. They didn't help me feel like something was finished. My wife recently read a book where she liked it, but she was really annoyed because the book ended right when something big happened. And, you know, this story was about like a royal family. And right at the end of the story, the king dies and his daughter becomes queen. And the story ends right there. You don't get to really find out the daughter's reaction to this. You don't get to find out, you know, what she's going to do about it. And sure enough, there's another book coming out in the series. You know, I then read it and I enjoyed it too, but it is a little bit of like, they could have given you a little bit more to make this story feel like it had an ending. Instead, it really just feels like part one of a longer story. So you as the writer have total control over this. You get to decide where your story ends and what you're going to suggest happens after the ending. So think about, how much do I want to end off? How much do I want to suggest is going to keep on going? And you have to find the right balance there for your readers. All right, so yeah, if you do that, you do have to then actually write the next story or book. If you leave it on a big cliffhanger, you can't leave your readers hanging. You got to tell them what happens next. And there are a few book series where the author there's one book series that I read. I really enjoyed book 1 and book 2. We've been waiting over 10 years for book 3. Really annoying. They need to wrap it up. All right, so activity 3. How could your story wrap things up but suggest something more? How can you encourage your reader to read the next story? So you can use what you've already started describing in our first 2 activities or come up with something new. That's okay too. But I want you to think about how you could wrap up a story, but then still tell the reader there's going to be more. There's a little bit, there's a little extra something. You can either imagine it or you can actually describe what the next story would be. But tell me, how do you wrap it up, but also leave a little bit of, yeah, there's more. Just you wait and see. And I will go to the Q&A box and I will read your guys' answers as they come up. Yeah, some good examples. Ethan, these are just examples from the last one while you guys type up your activity 3. For activity 2, Ethan said, Jack and the Beanstalk ends with him in his house, just like it starts. Yeah, it's a great example. Fallon says she always stays for the credits of Avengers movies because of those little extra scenes they put in there. I'm glad. Yeah, those scenes are always fun at the end of the movie. All right, so Kanan says, my other book I'm writing, the character is trying to get a magic stone that was stolen from him. And after he gets it back, I'm going to make it have a bit of a cliffhanger. He's going to get back to his house where he figures out that there is more than one magic stone. That's a great idea. You handle the problem that he's dealing with. His magic stone was stolen. But then you leave it at, you put right at the end, oh, there's another one. Oh, now I want to read the next story to find out what happens with that. Evelyn says, I read a book that suggested something more, but it wasn't a series. I hate it when books do that. Yeah, that's a really good point, Evelyn. If you as the writer, if you don't want to write another story or don't plan to, you probably shouldn't suggest too much more. You could leave your reader feeling really unsatisfied or even kind of mad at you if you end the story and leave kind of a big cliffhanger, or you make it sound like there's going to be another big part to the story and then you never write it. You might get your readers angry at you. They might be like, I'm still waiting to find out what happened with that flying squirrel that had a magic sword. What's happening with that? Where's book 2? Let's see. Yeah, Nim and Nish say, I like Lord of the Rings because it starts with the hobbits in the Shire and it ends with the hobbits back in the Shire. That's a good point. That's great mirroring. Let's see. Oh, one viewer is asking if they can email us something that they wrote. Definitely. If you send it to events@delphian.org, I would love to read some of your guys' writing. You guys have been writing little bits in the Q&A box, but anything like if you have a longer story that you've written and you'd like to share it with us, I'd love to see some of those stories. Send them to events, EVENTS, @delphian.org, and just put in the subject line like story for Corey to read. Some of the other teachers of webinars, they use that same email address. So just make sure you tell them that you want me to read it, and then I'll be able to read it. All right, so Katja says for their story, at the end it says the end for part 1. Yeah, that's a way you can do it. I mean, you can put things within your story that suggest something more, or you can just come right out and tell the reader, yeah, there's going to be another book. That works too. Let's see. All right, AG says, John's mom tells him about an essay writing contest in the whole state just after he finishes his last day of school. That's a great idea. So your person wasn't good at writing. By the end of the story, they're writing, they're having a lot of fun, and the mom tells them, oh, here's an essay writing contest, and you end the story, that definitely makes me go, oh, he's going to write something for that contest now. And if you just leave it there, that's fine, because I'll just imagine what happened. But then if you write another story, all the better. Reggie says, or Corey tells John about an essay writing contest. Awesome. Lila says, maybe at the end, my character is using her powers in her room when she senses someone watching her. She looks around but sees no one until she realizes it's her dad, who left when she was young, who is watching her. So her dad has superpowers too? Great ending, cliffhanger. Yeah, Haley says, this is like general good advice. The story could be a mystery and the character solves part of the mystery, but not the whole thing. Yeah, I would advise you should solve most of the mystery. If it's a mystery story specifically, that you've been having clues and, you know, a big mystery going through the whole book, you'll probably want to solve most of the mystery. A half-solved mystery, oh my gosh, that would just feel so, if you don't solve the main clues or the main answers of what was going on. But yeah, you can leave a few things unsolved, small things, to kind of lead us to the next story. That could work. Evelyn says, this is some dialogue from the characters. But can't I go to the park now that the killer is killed? April asked. No, said her dad. He's not. I mean, it's not still safe. Yeah, that'd be a cliffhanger. Yes, April wrote the address here, events@delphian.org. That's correct. Good job. Lorna's talking about you can also put an epilogue in your story. Yeah, an epilogue is kind of like a last chapter or an ending chapter where you kind of say how things ended up or how things like finished after the last chapter of your story. Yeah, a lot of writers do that too. That's a great idea. Fallon says the main character gets his freedom and saves his village from the tyranny of the village chief. He frees the slaves and gives them the ability to live their own life in the way that they wanted. At the end, he and his friends leave the village after making sure everything is working and that a new chief is leading the village. They head off to the capital of their country to try to put a stop to making people into slaves and seeing why and how this is happening. So basically, they walk off into the distance with the village waving bye to them. That's a great idea. You finish the problems of the first story, but have the characters leave on an adventure to solve an even bigger problem. Brilliant. Milo says, when you have like the second book or story in a series or season and end it with a new problem, but show a little bit of some of the old characters coming back and it says the end. Yeah, you can do that. Isis says, someone knocks on the door. He goes to answer the door and finds someone he didn't expect to see. Who are they? What do they want? I guess I'll find out. Yeah, having a mystery person arrive right before the end, bit of a cliffhanger. Angelica says there is a villain and superhero, and at the end, the superhero puts the villain in jail because he did something bad. But the villain has other sidekicks that have a plan and might free him with their plan. Yes. Oh, I love superhero stuff. That's great, Angelica. Ron Beer says, I watched a show where the main character died at the end and his mission or task was only halfway done. Well, I hope that they left it where like somebody was going to take up the mission and continue it, because otherwise I bet that felt kind of unsatisfying if they were only halfway there and there was no suggestion or there was nothing leading to how that story was going to end. Fallon says, what if they only solve part of it because that's what they saw or what was revealed to them? Maybe they find out that there's more to what they thought they knew at the end of the story. Yeah, definitely. You give the reader that feeling of ending, but then you reveal something new so that the story can keep on going. Great point. All right, great. So you guys are putting lots of more great answers in here. I think I have time to read just a couple more, and then we're going to have to end off. Ethan says, she slowly walked through the portal back home, but she knew that someday she would return. She didn't know how long it would be, but she knew that she would return. definitely, Ethan. That kind of reminds me of the Narnia books a little bit. Yeah. Yeah, Kanan says you could have one giant problem over the course of a lot of books and solve a smaller problem in each book, kind of like the Harry Potter series or a lot of other ones. I'll finish off with one more. April says, there was once a 7-year-old girl whose name was April, and she was making a book, and she couldn't find out how to do a lot of her story until she got a teacher named Corey. Thank you, April. You guys are too kind. All right, so that's all the time we have for those activities today. Thank you guys for watching. The little cliffhanger I wanted to leave all of you with is that I want you to tune in for our grand finale. It's on Friday at 2:30. That's going to be our last webinar, our last free webinar of this whole spring that we've been delivering will be during this slot on Friday. So tune in. We're going to have some fun things go on. You might see a few surprise guests. It should be pretty great. So Friday at 2:30, that's the cliffhanger I have for you. Guys and gals, I have loved delivering this creative writing webinar. I'm sad to go, but just like today's topic, this is the end. So if you would like to share some writing with me, send it to events@delphian.org. I would love to read it. And as always, keep on writing, keep on practicing. I want to see all of you publish something someday so that the whole world can read it. So thanks for watching. I'll see you guys on Friday. Bye.